Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again. Zoro is dead, and the Straw Hats are shattered. When Robin uncovers an ancient legend promising resurrection on a forgotten myth island, hope returns, but at a terrible cost. The spell demands proof of love, something no one believes Zoro ever felt. With only 48 hours before the legend becomes useless, Luffy forces his crew back to sea, racing against time, doubt, and destiny itself. As the truth behind Zoro's heart slowly surfaces, the crew must face one question. Can devotion strong enough to defy death truly exist? Disclaimer. This story do not belong to me. The author is The Stuff of Legends by 1004-Angel. Respect to author.
Chapter 7 Over the River and Through the Woods. A wound that would make an ordinary man unconscious, I won't lose to it. A wound that would kill an ordinary person, I won't lose to it. To face one who is extraordinary, hawk eyes. I can't allow myself to be ordinary. Roronoa Zoro. It wasn't my fault we got lost. And it was most definitely not my fault when Robin accidentally dropped her end of the stick after twisting her ankle on a root, and Blondie erupted into all hearts and healing, leaving my body to roll down a particularly steep decline, which led Namizo to go catch it, losing her footing and rolling down the hill, resulting in Sanjino's flight down the slope after her, unknowingly dragging Robin after him. It all went downhill from there, so to speak. Ow, 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 Namizo moaned, rubbing her ass as if that would make it better. I couldn't help but smirk as I casually treaded after the tumbling Nakama, using the comic relief in the tense situation to drive back the next wave of amnesia I could feel building up in the back of my head. I hadn't had one in the past 30 minutes or so, but I still kept up my guard. Nami-san, Sanjino panted. Robin-chan, are you alright? Robin nodded, holding a hand to her head. I think so. Where is Zoro-san? My body was soon located. It had fallen into a thicket, my bandages now riddled with thorns and digging into my skin. Faintly, the numbers on my arm displayed 7 hours 34 minutes and 30 seconds. Robin brushed aside the tacks and gently pulled my heavy body from its embrace, disregarding the small trails of blood sliding across her skin. She plucked each individual thorn from its place in my skin, setting them in a smile pile by her knee. Sanjino and Namiko didn't object, but mostly just bounced on the balls of their heels like they had to keep going or they would explode. Robin finally finished her task, straightening. Alright, I didn't want to cause Zoro-san any trouble when he returned to the physical world. That's understandable, said Namiko, turning her face to the wind. It rustled through the treetops like a sweet melody, smelling of mint and other delectable spices. Sai seemed perfectly at home with the scent. Robin cracked a small smile before the wind suddenly died and her grin was replaced by a curious line. Do you hear that? Hear what? Listen. The three went quiet, listening to the sounds of the forest. A bird twittered above our heads, and I followed the colorful bird as it moved from branch to branch. A wind rustled again, this time bringing the stench of sweat and mud, but also with the sweet sense of purity. A pebble began to shake next to my foot as the ground suddenly rumbled beneath our feet. As if to accompany the raging ground, the wave of blackness in my subconscious overcame my mind, and those people from my past flashed before my eyes again, me cutting down a huge group of people for what appeared to be no reason, the boy in the red vest attacking me and yelling loudly, a woman with long blue hair and a weird duck, a burning ship with a black-haired woman sitting on the rail of our ship. Pulling into the next island to see a huge tiger keel over dead, going off to hunt dinosaurs, in the blink of an eye, Little Garden was my earliest memory, making Mr. 3 and Miss Goldenweek as I slowly turned to wax. That wasn't the best day to have first memories of. What is this? Nancy cried, struggling to maintain her balance. Something is coming, Sai confirmed, squinting through the trees to where a distant drumming could be heard. And fast. What should we do, Sanji-san? Robin asked, putting a hand on my body's shoulder, ready for instant action. Wait, the blonde commanded. Let's see what it is. We did as instructed, and sat motionless for a minute. Finally, through the underbrush sprung a pure white stallion, so ivory he practically seemed to glow. The horse's eyes were wide, his hooves pounding the ground as he galloped toward us. I didn't see anything special about it, but Nancy and Robin seemed starstruck, following the creature as it barreled toward us. Following it through the woods came 20 more identical horses, all gleaming white and practically glowing. Nami-san, Robin-chan. Sanjino yelled. You'll be trampled. When neither of the girls moved, he took the initiative and wrapped an arm around Nami's waist, pulling her off to the side with him and leaping out of the way of the storming herd. Robin slowly blinked back into her senses, wrapping her arms around my body and pulling it off to the other side. Could it really be? She whispered. I didn't see what was so special about the horses as they drew closer, but I had to know what mesmerized the women so much that they were rendered immobile. I moved out of the way of the herd as they began to gallop past our hiding spot and overshadowed Robin, looking through her eyes and mine. I was probably hallucinating, but within the few seconds of stampeding animals I was able to see, I could have sworn every single one had a single solitary horn protruding from the center of their foreheads, the tip shining with an individual star. Amazing, Robin's mind was alive with a million different thoughts. Unicorns, complete with the lion's tail and feathered feet. Simply incredible. If wonders like this exist on Myth Island, what else awaits us further in our journey? A unicorn. I scoffed, leaving Robin's body for my own gaseous state. Like hell. Those things don't exist. Robin continued to watch the retreating horses, her eyes wide in shock, awe, and amazement. A light shone in her eyes similar to when she had discovered more ancient ruins or something. It was a nice look that I liked. It suited her, much more than that faraway look she sometimes got, like she was bathing in memories she didn't want. The sentimental moment was interrupted, however, when I suddenly sensed the same presence I had back when our river transport had beached. That feeling that we were being watched, that tingle that runs up your spine and you just can't shake it off. I whipped around, my fists balled, eyes roving through the trees to spot the stalker. There, a man was peeking around the edge of a trunk, his eyes fixed on Robin's back as she leaned over for a last look at the so-called unicorns. He seemed to come to some kind of conclusion and looked back over his shoulder, gesturing to someone behind him. A moment, and 4 tiny little men emerged silent as a shadow from their hiding place, each armed with a knife and a coil of rope. With a moan, I made a dive for Robin, throwing my thoughts into her mind. Turn around now, Robin. Unless you want to possibly die, do it now. Zoro. Do it now, woman. Damn, are all females this complicated? Robin turned, but by the time she had, the men had surrounded her in a semicircle, all knives pointed directly at her, an inch from her face. Her pupils shrank and she didn't move a muscle. It's a female, said one of the men, dressed in a black undershirt and black tunic, a belt of silver across his waist. A black traveling cloak was slung over his shoulders, ending at his ankles where donned were leather boots. His long brown beard was pulled into 3 separate ponytails, adorned with white ribbons. His dark eyes were shaded, giving him a very eerie appearance. Human. She's a bit pale, Alec, said the man next to the first, this one in a long navy blue tunic and gold belt. His cloak was dirt brown, with an accompanying gray shawl wrapped across his brown hair and short beard. He, too, wore leather boots, which he promptly stomped into the ground. Bit rare to see a female Alec. She's definitely human, Irogan, said the third, this one slightly older as indicated by his gray beard. This one was clad in a deep maroon, with a belt adorned with various devices that could either be used in war or mining. A tasseled broadsword was belted to his hip. Across his shoulders was a regal-looking cape threaded with silver. She doesn't smell like an Alec. But looks at this one's, said the fourth, this one shorter than the others. He wore a deep green tunic with a silver belt. Across his shoulders was what looked like a wolf's pelt, held in place by a black strap running over his shoulder and across his chest. His golden blonde beard was carefully braided down the front of his chest and his hair held back on his head with pins. He was currently poking at my body with a brown deerskin boot. He's has to be deads, no one stucks with those kinds of thorns survives for very longs. Robin's eyes shrank even more, and I felt a twinge in my own heart. Yes, I was dead, but Robin wasn't, and she had pulled me from the thicket and taken careful measures to extract the thorns from me. Oh shit, what should Wes dose with hers, Orin? Said the fourth, addressing the third and who I assumed to be the leader of the group. We'll see about the other 3 with the second group in a minute, said Orin, not removing his blade from where it was aimed at Robin's heaving chest. Humans don't sell well these days, but I suppose it depends. I let out a hiss. Slave traders. We've been ambushed by many slave traders. I didn't understand why Robin just dealt with these guys with her devil fruit powers. She could take them out with a flick of her wrist if she wanted to, so why not? She shifted a bit for a better position where she knelt, and I immediately saw the reason. The puncture wounds from where she had been stabbed by thorns were oozing a sickly yellow pus, and her hands were shaking slightly, but it appeared she didn't have any control over them. Her breathing had increased rapidly. Who are you? She asked, trying to maintain a steady composure. We don't have to tell you anything, said Irogan sharply, thrusting his sword closer between Robin's eyes. Silence, Orin interrupted. We may be cruel, but we're not evil. His gaze shifted back to his captive. We are the dwarven traders, Droy, Irogan, Orin, and Ilfred, selling fresh slaves to the wealthier mongrels living in the 4 temples at the top of those towers. For some reason, the slaves only last a week or 2. His eyes moved to Robin's bleeding and oozing hands.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
We'll have to fix that before the market tomorrow. What do we do with the body? Said the third dwarf, digging the heel of his boot into my body's cheek. Looks dead to me. Don't touch him, Robin screeched, drawing all attention to her. She had pulled herself into proper sitting position, her eyes blazing. Don't you dare. Droy and Ilfred exchanged glances. He can't be dead if she's making this much of fuss, said Droy. Could's it be's a witch's spells? Asked Ilfred. We's picked up someone's likes that befores. Stoles her from other dwarves, Utsi, but some other humans gots to her first. Is hates, true love's kiss. Orin stroked his beard. It's possible. Angela has been pretty active this past year, he nodded. All right, we'll take the body with us. He gestured toward Robin, who still looked tense and rigid, her eyes locked on Droy, who slowly removed his foot under her fierce gaze. Tie her up. 10 minutes showed Robin with her hands tied behind her neck and 2 more ropes around her legs to prevent escape. She stood higher than the 4 men, who only reached her waist in height. My body had been detached from its stick and laid on a makeshift stretcher fashioned from a large leaf and 2 metal poles one of the dwarfs had in his satchel. How they fit beats me. Robin-chan, came Sanjino's voice from where he and Namiko had taken shelter from the stampede. Are you okay? I resisted the urge to stomp over to him and give him a good thinking to. It had been at least 15 minutes since the horses left, why the hell hadn't he done anything? Our dwarves turned toward his yell, curiously looking over the ridge toward the voice. I took the initiative and climbed up to get a good look, all rage and fire, when I saw his and Nancy's situation. Similar to us, the two were surrounded by a group of 6 dwarves, all dressed completely different than ours. Nancy was completely gagged and bound, lying on a tiny wooden cart pulled by a Shetland pony. Sanjino had been put against a tree, 2 knives sticking nauseatingly from his boot, no doubt going through his foot and into the ground below. His call had to have been given permission by his dwarven group's leader, a man with long black hair and a close-cropped beard. Dressed in black chainmail and tunic and armed with a black-bladed sword, he looked positively fierce, even without the bow and arrow aimed directly at Sanjino's chest. Yes, Sanji-san, Robin answered. I've met some new friends. I'll be going with them for a while. Yeah, me too. Gark, Orin yelled, drawing his sword and joining me to where he could see the other group of dwarves. This was our catch. The bowman looked up at Orin, a smirk evident on his face. How many times do I have to remind you that you're not the only slave trading group there is? He growled. We saw him first, they're ours. Orin's eyes roved over Sanjino's predicament. You're too brutal, Gark, he muttered. I'm assuming you'll fetch a good price for those. Sure do, said Gark. The female is what humans call ripe for the picking. His lackeys chuckled at their leader's joke. The man is strong, hard labor. And what did you get? A half-dead one and an all-dead one. The dwarves laughed again. Watch your tongue, Orin snapped, turning to rejoin his kin. We'll say you at the square then, yes. With your pitiful catch. Gark snorted. Doubt it. Sanjino's whimpers of pain faded as Orin and I returned to our group. We'll be off to Lauren, said the dwarf, sheathing his sword. Hi, said the others, and with that, Robin and I were escorted from our place and into the forest, led by a curious but not all horrible group of slave drivers. Damn, had I my real body I could deal with these assholes in mere seconds. But then again, had I my body, we wouldn't be here in the first place. Unicorns, dwarves. What next? Werewolves and vampires. Before long, our tiny group came the bank of a river, a bridge stretching across the rapids and letting off to where a town could be seen through the trees. Tiny huts with thatched roofs, 2-story buildings with flowerpots hanging on the windowsill, and advertising taverns or shops. As we marched through the town, which was normal-sized as a human, different creatures emerged from the shops and what I assumed to be houses. One woman walking past us held up an umbrella to shield herself from the sun, her skin deathly pale and her eyes glowing red. As we passed, she did not acknowledge us, but continued on her way toward a tavern entrance where several similar people stood waiting and smiling happily. A glowing bug flitted in front of my face, and I instinctively raised a hand to swat at it when I remembered that I was intangible. At closer glance, it wasn't a bug at all, but rather a tiny person with wings growing from her back, dressed in a leaf by means of clothing. Wings beating a million times a second, she waved to Irogan cheerfully, who waved back, and sped off, a trail of stars in her wake. Fairy. From a nearby tanner's store exited an extremely tall man, completely bare-chested and covered in coarse black hairs. Where his legs should have been began a horse's chest and body, the 2 parts grafted smoothly together. He laid his new tanned skins across his back and stared at us as we walked past, his black eyes wary. Centaur. Across the street, 2 tiny children left a toy store laden with different gifts, waved off by a short man in a green and red suit and black belted shoes, with pointy ears on either side of his hat. Elf. I shook my head. Is that what Sai had meant when he said the stuff of legends? When he ran back to us all grins and hearts, exclaiming to have seen the town where resided inhuman creatures. He hadn't meant just legends like Gold Roger or the City of Gold, been there, done that. I still remembered it. He meant creatures which actually didn't exist. The apparent unicorns, dwarfs, centaurs, fairies, vampires, elves. Holy shit, I was going insane. I just couldn't comprehend the existence of these people. It was simply unacceptable. The dwarfs finally pulled off the main road and made their way through an alley between two pawn shops. Down a steep flight of stairs, two lefts and a right, through a sewer and finally coming to a door built into a stone slab. Orin stepped forward and rapped the hilt of his sword against the stone 4 times in rapid succession. "The witch's omen burns where?" came a voice through the rock. "The right side of the white oak," Orin replied, and stepped back as the door was pushed open to allowing our group entry. Whatever lay beyond the door was unseen, the dark suffocating all the light from the room. Irogan and Ilfred entered first with my body suspended between them. A few moments later, the soft FW hump of body hitting stone could be heard and the silent words spoken between the dwarves and another creature inside. Orin ushered Robin and Droy inside, following and shoving the door closed behind him. I remained outside, unsure whether to follow them. I paced back and forth for a minute before I felt a twinge in my gut. Robin was in there alone. Not technically since my physical form was there, but she was alone mentally, no one to talk to but herself, surrounded by slave drivers and who the hell knows what else. Besides, I may be dead, but I wasn't losing my hunger for adventure, and I most certainly was not going to run away from a bunch of men hardly taller than my belly button. Damn, I took a running start to phase through the rock, running at top speed. I had grown used to the rush of colors on either side of my vision as my intangible body moved through the solids, how easily I reformed on the other side. So I wasn't expecting to suddenly crash into a hard rock, my face literally flattened against a stone, my chest blooming with a new bruise. I peeled myself off the huge boulder, rubbing my nose as my eyes widened in disbelief. I hadn't been able to phase through. Robin was on the other side, all alone, and I couldn't enter. I tried again for good measure, running even harder at the entrance, resulting only in a huge mass of bruised skin rising from the center of my forehead similar to as if Nancy had hit me. I put a hand against the stone, staring forward as if I could somehow project myself into the room, but still to no avail. I was stuck, and as I pouted and kicked the huge stone, another wave of nausea rose up behind my mind, and the images had already begun rolling across my vision. This was the bad that bad thinks is bad. Chapter 8 Broken and Shattered. Sometimes the only thing you have to doubt is your own common sense. Nico Robin. Robin Pav. I had known for a long time now. Longer than I would care to admit, but I knew it was me. Since I first read the legend aboard the ship, when I realized that it finally applied to us, I knew it was me. It was certainly not the easiest of discoveries, but a pleasant one nonetheless. I had pored over all the possibilities during our hardships to get to where we are now, and at first I refused to believe it. And when I finally gained the opportunity to share my thoughts with him in the boat, I was ready to tell him, because I knew he was there. Zoro was there. I can't explain how I knew, but he just was. A disturbance in the calm air, a flash of green from the corner of my eye, a voice in my head. At first I thought it was my own subconscious, berating me for being a fool and not looking through the second window. And then his voice warned me about my captor's attack, and that's when it slowly sank in that no, it wasn't my own mind, not my subconscious. He was with us, in spirit, watching over us. I was terrified the dwarves would leave him behind while I went on. I didn't know what came over me, the short man only had to touch him and a rage boiled up inside my chest. The cuts on my hand flared, but it only added to my rush of sudden passion, to not damage the body further. What had it endured until now? A raging cyclone, nearly falling overboard, hung upside down from a pole, tumbling down a steep decline, and punctured with poison thorns. It was a dead body, it can't heal itself. True, it won't bleed or bruise, but imagine the physical pain Zoro would return to. And yet, despite my rage, I couldn't help but internally laugh at the dwarves' assumption that he was under a sleeping spell. Of course, I had seen unicorns and now dwarves, I had no doubt that spells such as that existed. And still, what the dwarf with a lisp, Ilfred San, had said, true love's kiss. It sounded similar to the legend I had memorized now, woman reviving the man in the waters of the river Chai. The term, reviving, could be interpreted different ways, but the meaning was still the same basic principle. And as we walked into the town of Lauren, I couldn't help but compare the dwarf's term and our own, noting the similarities between them. The right side of the white oak, said Orin, and the great stone door slid open to admit us. I bloomed eyes from the back of my head, discreetly so that no one would notice. I searched frantically for that shimmer against a backdrop of hard gray stone, a flash of that secondary color that indicated Zoro's spirit, and there was none.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
It had completely vanished, invisible even to my eye, which had grown accustomed to picking out the right symbols of indication. Keep your head down, said Orin as a warning. The ceiling is too low for humans to stand straight. I did as he suggested, and crouched low to the dwarves' height. As soon as the door rolled shut, my extra eye vanished, and I was plunged into darkness. I could faintly hear the scufflings of the dwarves as they moved around, obviously used to the dim lighting. They conversed with another voice in some foreign language I didn't understand, even with my seemingly unlimited knowledge of linguistics. I wished heavily that I could generate light, but unfortunately, I could not. I hoped I wouldn't die of claustrophobia before I was able to bring Zoro to the highest temple. Suddenly, a lantern flared up, lighting the room enough so that I could at least see the dim outlines of my captors. The flame danced in its cage, casting shadows all throughout the corners of the room. Doing a quick head count, I realized one more dwarf had joined us, this one with a black beard and dark eyes, a circlet of silver on his head and a thick, ornamented strap across his shoulder. He handed a second lantern to Orin, who proceeded to light it and give it to Droy, who took up the back of our procession. As more light flooded the room, I saw that inscribed on the back of the boulder that was the entrance to this hideout was an intricate circle with foreign letters wrapped around them, like some sort of enchantment. What is that? I risked asking, nodding my head in the direction of the circle. Ilfred looked to where I was gesturing. That's a wards, that's is. He said proudly. Keeps aways the ghouls and others undesirables, Utsi. West don't wants anybody's finding outs about this place. That being said, he prodded me forward, and our group continued into the darkness, walking down a steep set of stairs and into the musty smell of the underground. As we walked, my back felt suddenly cold, like a warmth that had been there had vanished, and now I felt like death itself was crawling up my skin. If I couldn't feel Zoro's presence any longer, then that circle had to be the cause of it. Keeps away the ghouls, Ilfred had said. Ghouls by definition were evil spirits or phantoms, robbing graves and feeding on dead flesh. Which, now that I think about it, would be very bad in my situation. My eyes found Zoro's body, still lying on the litter strung between Irogan and Ilfred. With each wobbly yet sure-footed step, his head swayed from side to side limply like a rag doll. It reminded me of the times I used to bloom an eye inside the men's dorm late into the night and watch them sleep. It calmed me to know that people could sleep calmly when I was affiliated with them. I could help but smile as we continued down the steep stairwell. We finally emerged in a huge room, tall enough for me to stand to full height. My back creaked from having been bent over for so long. The walls were lined with glowing torches, tiny creatures flittering inside the can. The ceiling was made of pure gem, what appeared to be a pearl of some sort, but this wasn't the correct environment for it to grow. At the far end of the circular cavern was a tall desk with another dwarf behind it. To either side of the desk, two doors led off from this place. Orin approached the dwarf at the desk, a pudgy man with a light brown beard braided and thrown over his shoulder to prevent it getting into the ink on the paper he was scribbling on. "Bosi," he said, "I bring 2 for the auction tomorrow." Bosi put down his quill and stared at me quizzically, and I studied him likewise. Our eyes locked, and he pursed his lip, settling back down. "First Yalan, pass. Second Yalan, medical," Droy whispered to me. "She's touched the crickle thorn," was all Orin had to say before Bosi gestured toward the door on the right, where a sign written in a dwarven language probably indicated hospital wing. In the second, Bosi stared hard at Zoro, who did not stare back. "He looks dead. We believe he is under a sleeping spell," Orin explained. "Angela has been pretty active this year, you know. And the Valkyrie do like to experiment." Bosi chewed the inside of his cheek. "In that case, go ahead and put him through third. The female will follow after second." That being said, he took up a long pole and smashed it against the pearl ceiling, where I could see several chips were already missing. As the pieces fell, Bosi drew out a pair of shackles from inside his desk and fit the pieces into a small hole in the lock. The cuffs glowed with a soft ivory white, then faded back into the black metal. Orin took the shackles and replaced my ropes with the cold metal. Bosi began scribbling once again on his roll of parchment, ignoring my captors. Ilfred and Irogan, Orin ordered the 2 carrying Zoro. "Take the sleeping one down that way, you know what to do. Droy and I shall take the female through second Yalan and join you shortly." The 2 dwarves nodded and hefted the litter to a more comfortable position on the shoulder and began walking to the left as Droy and Orin pulled me to the right. I resisted. I wouldn't let Zoro out of my sight. I didn't know what the Yalan were, and I wasn't going to take any chances with our separation. I didn't trust these slavers, and I didn't trust their culture, even if it was fascinating. I managed to cross my oozing wrists over my chest, my eyes fixed on the retreating backs of the dwarves, but no limbs bloomed from the floor. I strained to sprout spare arms, but they did not appear, and soon I was overcome by Orin and Droy, and I lost sight of the swordsman. I cried out, commanding my captors to release me, unknown hysteria rising in my tone. I didn't want to be separated from him. Not since the warmth on my back had gone. The hall I was led down eventually expanded into a large room cemented to an off-white color. The musty scent had vanished to be replaced with one of sweet flowers and herbs Chopper used in his medicines. A line of beds sectioned off by curtains lined either side of the room like a hospital ward. Some shadows could be seen behind some of the curtains, many of them non-humanoid. We were approached by a tall woman dressed in a long white lab coat and bearing a clipboard, resembling the one we had passed on the upper levels of the town, Her skin was pale as death, her eyes glowing red, and when she smiled, her pointing canines were revealed through her black lips. Second Yalan. Orin nodded. Where? Her hands. She was touched by the crickle thorn. The vampire smiled again, scribbling on her clipboard. Drainage prescription, she said. Shabian will see her. Vampire. I whispered in awe. A what? Droy grumbled. No, she's Alec. Descended from vampires, but not the same. They are specially bred to deal with infectious diseases which infect the blood. The Alec smiled again as she turned sharply on her heel and strolled back down the ward. I pulled along behind. Near the back of the ward, I was pushed through a second door into a small room with only a single bed, a hole in the corner and a simple sink. The walls were mirrored, so on all sides I could see only myself and my ragged appearance. With knotted, flyaway hair, ripped clothes and a wild look in my eye, I looked like I had just spent the night in the woods with no sleeping bag or tent with a pack of wild dogs. The door was closed behind me, and I was left to sit on my own on the cot. I was reminded of the days I spent on my own the past 20 years, alone in my own solitude, filled with constant worry that this night might be my last. But now my worry was directed toward Zoro, and wherever he may be. I refused to refer to him as it. I knew he was still there in spirit, and that he would return. The minutes ticked by, and all I had to look at was myself in the mirror across from me. I passed the time attempting to free myself from the shackles, which proved in vain, and also to try again in blooming my limbs, once again with no results. I was nowhere near sea stone. I didn't feel the weakness and helplessness that usually accompanied the user's bane. At one point, another pale Alec entered the room with folded clothes in her hand, with the indication that I should change into them. I was now wearing a thick strip of durable satin across my breasts, leaving my chest, shoulders, and stomach bare. A long red skirt was wrapped around my waist, open at the hip, and ending in tassels mid-calf. It was a very exposing dress, but it was still very fashionable. I had tossed my old clothes in the corner. A pity. I really liked that outfit. Finally, the door opened again to admit a tall black-haired Alec, his red eyes framed by his long bangs. He wore an open-neck black suit without a tie, allowing his collar to breathe freely. He held his arms out wide and smiled a toothy smile. Shabian, Miss 24,601, he said. 24,601. I asked. Your number, Shabian explained, walking forward with still his arms open. We do not take the time to learn names. I held my chin high, determined not to show weakness. These people were a dangerous group, I could tell just by looking. If you insist, I said, with a hint of ice in my tone. What has become of my spell-ridden companion? Shabian tilted his head. I have heard of no such person, only that you have suffered crickle thorn, and are in need of my skills. I raised my cuffed hands to show him my oozing hands. The puncture wounds had begun to swell to a painfully large size, the skin red and yellow. The impish grin faded from Shabian's face, and he gently stroked his nimble fingers over my wounds, his black nails gently scraping against my skin. I braced myself for pain, but nothing was felt. His expert hands poked and prodded at my hands for a good 10 minutes, occasionally wiping his sandpapery tongue across the puncture wounds. His hair fell over my wrists, and I could not see whatever he was doing. I resisted the urge to recoil from his grasp. I had a vague idea of what he was doing, but the only doctor I trusted was Chopper, and I was not going to give myself over to some strange vampire-like man. A bolt of lightning spread through my arms as something sharp pricked my skin. Shabian, finally content with his work, sat back with a smile, running his tongue over his teeth. I am particularly fond of cricklethorn venom, he said, swallowing. I don't leave a single cell behind. My eyes widened, flipping my hands over from palm to back several times, just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. What was left of the puncture wounds was now just simple white lines on my skin, and even they were slowly fading. 2 holes on either side of my hand indicated where Shabian had punctured my skin to bleed the poison from my blood. What? I murmured, incredulous. Shabian waved his hand dismissively. 'Twas nothing. Do not think of it as an act of charity, you sell better healthy. If you will come with me, please. Leave your things behind. I stood from the bed. I was reluctant to go with Shabian, but, whatever he had done, I was no longer infected with this strange cricklethorn venom, and I owed him something. He took me by the arm and led me back down the ward, ordering me to not look at the other patients. I obeyed, but curiosity nagged at my conscience. We had left the ward before it got the better of me. We roamed through the labyrinth of corridors, the breath of the earth in my nose, the sounds of our footsteps echoing through the passages. We met no one on our way to wherever we were going, and I took the absence of distractions as an opportunity to create a map of this underground in my head, to possibly use as an escape route should it be needed. Shabian-san, I said as my guide paused at a fork in the tunnels. What is this gem in my shackles? It limits me. I was careful not to reveal my possession of devil fruit abilities. Should he know, it might not prove well in my favor. It's called Moon Pearl, said the dark-haired Alec, coming to a decision and pulling me to the left. It's embedded in every piece of restraining equipment. What does it do? He stopped and studied me with those glowing eyes. You're not from around here. No. Shipwrecked. I said, dodging the entire truth. His eyes narrowed, slowly walking forward again. It's a stone found deep underground beneath the 4 towers. In the realm outside our own, its cousin is referred to Kairoseki, or Sea Prism Stone. This gem is much more powerful, it neutralizes any superhuman abilities, and renders its victim to that of an average member of its distinct species. Why is it called the Moon Pearl if it's found so deep underground? I continued, genuinely interested now. Bosi had placed that substance in my handcuffs, and it must be the cause of my inability to bloom extra limbs. At first I had assumed it to be the venom rendering me powerless. And I didn't feel weak at all, not like I was clamped in sea stone. I was at the average strength of a human woman. Interesting. It is said that it was discovered by the moon goddess, Lady Freya, in a time known to the world as the Void Century, but the actual date is unknown to all. I almost stopped walking. There was a jerk in my gait as the name took me by surprise, but I quickly regained my balance. The Void Century. Does that mean that a poneglyph is on this island? I asked urgently. He looked at me curiously. Poneglyph. Yes. I didn't bother to hide the urgency and excitement in my voice. It would be like a big tall cubic structure with a lot of strange writing on it. Could it be you refer to the Cube of Cain? The what? Shabian stopped walking. I could barely keep still. If this Cube of Cain was in fact a poneglyph, it might be the key to finally unlocking the true history. But it may also hold the key to granting audience with the mongrels that lived high above on the 4 towers, which we appeared to be under at this very moment. Anything to get Zoro and I to the top and one step closer to the River Chai, whatever it was. The Cube of Cain belongs to the moon goddess Freya, and is in the care of her 12 handmaidens, the Valkyrie, and is a mystery to us down below, Shabian explained carefully. But there has been a rumor lately that the women up there are using their servants to unlock the secrets of it. That's why they only last a week. It's only a rumor, of course. My mind raced. I volunteer, then, I said. I will go to the Valkyrie as a servant and help them unlock its secrets. The Alec raised an eyebrow. One does not simply volunteer to work for the Valkyrie. They're a very brutal group, selecting their closest servants from among the slain of battle. No one volunteers. Then I won't make it simple, I said, confidence building inside me. How long until the auction? 8 hours. I cursed silently. That was over Zoro's time limit. Last I checked it had been about 6 hours and 34 minutes. Who knew how much time had passed, and how much time he had left? I went for a different tactic. I need your help, Shabian-san, I said. The Alec smirked. Know your place, 24,601, he said. You're going to the stock cells. Maybe you'll find your spell-ridden companion there. He spoke no more as we continued forward, but his hand wrapped tighter around my forearm, as if he was double-checking to make sure I didn't try to escape. I was too mind-boggled to even think about such a thing. Valkyrie, Zoro, poneglyph. All the pieces to the puzzle had to fit somehow together, and somehow coincide to all lean to my advantage. Different scenarios and escape routes and strategies raced through my mind at top speed, and it was so distracting that when I finally jerked out of my trance, I found myself cuffed to a wall at the back of a large stone cell, the hem of my new skirt a bit dirty. I must have been locked away some time ago. Shabian was nowhere to be seen. I looked to my right. Wall. To the left, I nearly cried with joy. Zoro was tethered to the wall at the farthest corner of the room, his ankle clasped with a moon pearl shackle. His bandages had been removed, and his entire body cleansed. The swordsman's body was now dressed in long black slacks and a loose-fitting white shirt, the sleeves billowing as a cold draft suddenly swept through the corridor through the tall bars across from me. Through the thin cloth, I could see the soft glow of the numbers on his forearm. 5 hours 46 minutes and 35 seconds. My shackles wouldn't allow me to reach him with my hand, and I felt like I couldn't believe he was actually there if I couldn't touch him. So I retreated back to the wall, still sitting as close to him as my restraints would allow. I drew my knees to my chest and rested my forehead in the crevice they made. Only just under 6 hours left. I was without a plan, locked in a cell deep under the earth prepared for the life of a servant. My Hana powers were useless, and quite frankly, I hadn't felt this helpless in 20 years. Even in Eni's lobby I had the knowledge my Nakama were there for me. Now I had no idea what was going on out there, and I was scared. I couldn't give up. Zoro needed me. He was depending on me. The entire crew was depending on me. Nami and Sanji were out there and needed my help, wherever they were. Luffy and the rest of the guys would be on their way promptly as well as soon they finished with the Marines. I wiped away the tears I hadn't realized were streaking down my face. Sighing deeply to release tension, I stared in defiance at the bars. You won't defeat me. I'll break out of here. Zoro and I will go to the Valkyrie. I'll read the Cube of Cain. I'll bring Zoro to the River Chai. We'll be reunited with the crew, and we'll sail on to the new world. Zoro, I want to say something. I love you. Chapter 9 Inside the Belly of the Beast. Speed, power. When facing me, they mean nothing. Nico Robin. Robin Pav. I only knew how much time passed by the numbers on his arm. 1 hour I sat in that cell, rubbing my bare arms to keep warm and blocking out the sounds of clanking metal that were my chains. No one came through the corridor outside my cell, not even to bring a meal. My stomach rumbled, and I shushed it quietly. I couldn't afford to let myself get weak from lack of sustenance. I had yet to figure out a way of escape. Once I removed the moon pearl, I could easily break free. The seconds ticked by. My movements became desperate and shaky, with only 4 hours left. My wrist was rubbed red from constant pressure against the moon pearl cuffs, trying to slide it through, but I had no such luck. The only option seemed to break my wrist, but I was hesitant. Even if it meant Zoro's return, I was not sadistic, and was not looking forward to escaping with 100 broken wrists. The thought was already sending sparks of pain up my arms. I looked at Zoro again. His skin was pale as an alec, lips drained of all color and hair limp and dead across his wide forehead. When bodies lose their lives, it immediately begins to break down into gas and decay. It had only been about a day and a half since his sacrifice, but already it was losing form. I had been around plenty of bodies in my day, but never one of someone I truly cared about, more than I should. It sickened me. I breathed heavily through my nose, finally resigning myself to the inevitable. Breaking my wrists would be the only option to get out of this mess. I sucked my bottom lip and ripped a shred of cloth from my skirt, stuffing it inside my mouth, preparing myself for the pain. Snap! My bones shattered with the sound like a gunshot. I bit down hard on the cloth, whimpering through the tears suddenly leaking down my face. I dared not move for a minute, straining for the sound of a guard's boots clicking across the hard cobble ground, but none came, and I allowed myself a quiet squeak of pain. This was not the first time I'd broken a bone, but the pain still got to me. Struggling to remain as silent as possible, I slipped my wrists through my moon pearl cuffs, sliding them gently to the ground. I spat the cloth from my mouth, grimacing in pain. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but no sudden surge of energy flared to life in my veins as my abilities returned. I shouldn't have thought something childish like that. As it was, with both hands practically immobile, I would have some trouble sliding Zoro free from his own restraints. Luckily for me, my dominant wrist had retained less damage than my left, and did not hurt as bad when it moved. My fingers twitched, but moved all the same. Perhaps even more luckily, the Alec or dwarves or whoever had locked Zoro up had been careless, and the shackle binding his ankle was a size too large, and his foot slid cleanly through. His skin was cool to the touch, and I felt another surge of tears welding behind my eyes. I walked to the cell door, cradling both wrists in the opposite armpit as if that would somehow ease the throbbing. It was highly likely this metal was constructed of moon pearl as well. The best way to get the key is to lure it from the guard, but there were two problems with that plan. 1. It would alert the guard that I had somehow escaped my restraints, and 2. There was no guard to begin with. I experimented with my current abilities, blooming various body parts inside and outside the cell doors, finding that as long as I was careful to not touch metal, I was on free rein with my powers. With each hand that I bloomed, the pain in my wrists doubled, and at 10 hands I reached my maximum capacity of silence. I breathed deeply, struggling to control my lungs. My limbs disappeared in a puff of petals, and I rested for a moment to ease my mind from the 1,000 knives stabbing my wrists. Steeling myself, I bloomed eyes up and down the corridor, scanning for the keys to this cell. It was harder than I imagined. To bloom eyes in places I've never been before can be exhausting, and it required a period of rest between expeditions. Luck was with me. I spotted a flash of silver just at the end of the corridor, and upon closer inspection, it was revealed that a single key hung from the silver ring. A hand grew from the wall and stole the key from its place, passing it along back down the corridor to where I was imprisoned. The key slid under the cage bars. The hand that did so brushed the iron, and disappeared suddenly without my will. It is moon pearl, I confirmed, kneeling to scoop up the ring. Navigating myself to the bars, I fit the key into the lock and twisted it. The barred door swung open on silent hinges, and I stepped out into the hallway cautiously, glancing up and down through the darkness. Feet supporting the swordsman's body followed me out, and I laughed silently as I remembered back on the Sky Island when he had been electrocuted by the false god, and I walked him up to the next cloud level in the same manner. Since I had been spacing out on the way into the corridor, I did not know which direction was the exit. Trusting my instincts, I took a right turn and walked quietly away, 4 extra pairs of my feet following. The air was cold, and I rubbed my bare arms as best I could. The pain had faded to a dull throb, but it still spiked suddenly at random intervals. I struggled to control the cold that prickled my skin by focusing on other warming thoughts, mainly focusing around memories I secretly hoped to have in the future, though I would never admit these desires aloud. When I was a child, I watched other children playing with their parents, and I had thought to myself, when I have children, I won't leave them behind. They won't grow up like I did. And after the Buster call, I thought that vision had ended. No one would love a demon from the Forbidden Country, with dirty Oharan blood running through her veins. My face was all over the world, and everyone knew my name. And I felt when I finally joined Luffy's crew, I had something to live for. Here were people who cared about me, who loved me and didn't care about my past. And here was Zoro. Happy, not a care in the world except for his own ambition. He didn't care that other people called him a demon, unlike me, though I would never show it. He didn't care how other people saw him, he was only focused on his goals of world's greatest swordsman. I didn't know his past, nor his reasoning behind it, there was no need. We were the demons of the world, each sacrificing anything and everything to achieve our own goals. My sub-dream resurfaced. I unintentionally began dreaming of my children, laughing and smiling, playing with their father's katana while I read them a bedtime story. It was a horrifying thought at first, because at the time it had only been a month since I had become a straw hat. Were those feelings manifesting since the beginning? Did I really feel this way? I watched the swordsman closely the next week, and he didn't seem to act any differently than usual. Did he have similar dreams? Was he as good at hiding it as I was? Normally I could read people like an open book, but The Swordsman was a mystery novel to me, taking the plot one step at a time and trying to figure out who the killer is before it's revealed. I remembered our escape from Eni's lobby, standing on the deck of the beloved Mary, crying and thanking my Nakama with all the power of my heart. Save the thanks until after we've escaped, he had said, and I laughed as Sanji and Chopper attacked him. Even then, with us reunited, he was still the same. Nothing could faze him, and he told me later in private, don't think we wouldn't come for you. We're not the kind of people who would let others, especially Nakama, die for them. So why did he do exactly what I had wanted to do? Sacrifice myself and die for the sake of the crew. I had listened to Brook's story of Zoro's willingness to give himself up for Luffy, and I sat in stunned silence as everyone rode with all their power, my eyes occasionally finding that small spark of green near where Zoro used to sleep on the deck. Why not follow your own advice? I wondered as Sanji, Nami and I trekked through the woods, watching the body's limp head sway from side to side as if he were only sleeping. I could almost hear him snoring. Something hot breathed down my neck. I stopped walking, goosebumps running down my spine. I didn't turn around immediately, my ears straining to place the sudden ragged breathing that had joined my echoing footsteps. Scrolling through the knowledge I had, I eventually came to the conclusion of monster. Not the most specific of deductions, but at best it was what I could do. My feet moved Zoro's body a little ahead of me, and I turned slowly, the hot breath on my neck now blowing in my face as I stared in horror at the huge humanoid creature looming over me. My eyes started at his legs, cloven hooves spread wide apart on the hairless hindquarters of a huge goat or cow. As my eyes moved up to its torso, thick black hairs sprouted across its body, covering its entire head, chest, and ripped arms. The creature's entire body was bulging with muscles, rippling as it shifted balance. Its head was that of a massive bull, with huge horns sprouting from the peak of its head. Beady eyes stared down at me, its wet nose glistening in the light of a torch in the wall. It breathed heavily, stink of rotting meat meeting my nostrils. How had this giant managed to sneak up on me? A minotaur, I breathed, backing up a step. The guard. Suddenly, the monster let out a long loud bellow, the deep-throated sound reverberating down the long corridor and pounding on my eardrums. I tried shushing him, but it didn't acknowledge me. It was obviously alerting the Alec to my escape attempt, and that was something I couldn't have. I began running down the hall, away from the minotaur, keeping Zoro right next to me so I wouldn't lose him. I bloomed eyes to guide my way, and still keeping an eye on the minotaur, which had taken off in hot pursuit, still bellowing. I took a sharp right turn, skidding to a halt as I swerved into a blocked-off corridor, the brick worn with age. I whipped around to retrace my steps, but the exit had been blocked by the ancient creature, snorting and dragging a hoof across the ground. I cursed for allowing myself to get cornered. I doubted with my broken wrists I could take on such a huge creature, all the while trying to protect Zoro. I grimaced, crossing my arms over my chest anyway. It was the only option. Now, said a voice. We don't want you having to go break those pretty little arms of yours, do we? The Minotaur backed off to reveal a group of 10 Alec, all wearing tailored black suits stark against their pale skin, and all smiling with an unkind aura. I spotted Shabian among them, his smile a little less intimidating than the others. I backed up another step, my back pressing against the wall. They took a step forward. The owner of the first voice smiled wider, holding out 3 fingers. Stock 24,601, he said, his voice like nails on chalkboard. On the count of 3, walk forward. I promise the Minotaur won't kill you. Just take an arm or a leg. And then we'll see if you're still available for sale. I shook my head, not lowering my arms. I wasn't intimidated by his threat, but I still didn't dare try and perform a clutch. Not yet. Not while I could still negotiate. Please, I began. Let me go. There is something I must do before I am sold. 3. I need to reach the Valkyrie. My eyes found Shabian. Help me find the Pone, Cube of Cain. The Alec did not return my gaze. 2. The man I love is dying and the only way to save him is to take him to the Valkyrie. Please, help me. My voice rose to a scream, tears leaking from my eyes. 1. I raised my head, frustration evident in my features, even through the tears carving shining paths down my cheeks. This was the only way. Trienta. ROOOOOOBIIIIIIIN Quan. My heart leapt. The Alec whipped around, but not fast enough. Over the Minotaur's shoulder, I spotted a flash of yellow, followed by the crackling sound of electricity. The cloud above their heads suddenly exploded into light, lightning crackling over their heads. I threw myself over the body as the screams of pain from the Alec and Minotaur rose above the sound of streaking electricity. Smoking bodies hit the ground with a thump, billows of steam rising from the mouths. I blinked the tears from my eyes and turned around, a smile lighting my face. "You bastards," said a wonderfully familiar voice. "Trying to hurt my Robin-chan. Your knight in shining armor is here, my princess." "Shush, Sanji-kun," said a female voice. "The others will hear us." The smoke cleared, and the wonderful features of the Straw Hat Cook and Navigator appeared, both beaten and bruised but alive and as energetic as ever. Our eyes met, and we all rushed together in a large hug. I was never one for such close contact, but it was good to feel the warmth of their bodies against mine, driving out the cold of loneliness, hopelessness and solitude. I involuntarily began to weep again, partially from sadness and the other part from laughter. The cook looked practically ready to explode from joy. As our group embraced, I spotted a flash of green. We finally all parted, holding each other at arm's length to examine the other. Sanji looked no worse for wear, his hair matted and his clothes torn and dirty. Wounds on his bare feet oozed blood, but he didn't seem to notice. Nami had attempted to keep herself in order, but had no such luck. Her thriller bark tee was barely covering her body now, her shoes missing and shorts ripped at the hem. Her smoking Klimatact was in her belt, and I marveled at how it had not been confiscated. "How did you get here?" I asked, genuinely curious. Nami and Sanji exchanged glances. "You probably won't believe us," the navigator said. "It was the weirdest sensation," Sanji said, looking at his hands. "It was like I had been submerged in a tub of boiling water. I was hot all over, and I started sweating." "It was on our way to Lauren," Nami put in. "In the town. I had this sudden image in my head," Sanji continued. "Like a mental map. I don't know how, but I just suddenly knew where to go." One of the dwarves was carrying Nami-san's Klimatact, so I pretended to stumble, and tripped him, grabbing it and, well. We somehow managed to escape. Nami took up the story. "I don't know where our captors are now, we just kinda left them in the street." But Sanji's apparent map was leading the way. "Took us down this alley, backtracked a couple of times. It was like that damn Marimo was trying to give us directions," Sanji muttered. "And we eventually came to a giant boulder set into this cliff. This is where it gets weird," I heard Zoro's voice. In my head, I struggled to show no emotion. It wasn't just me, I hadn't been imagining anything. Zoro's spirit really could talk to us. And if he had led Sanji and Nami here, that means he had been with me until our separation because of the Ghoul Ward. It also meant he was here now. It told me. Sanji took on an imitation of Zoro's voice. "Knock 4 times and answer, the right side of the white oak." So I did. I listened intently as Sanji and Nami switched off, relaying their struggle through the maze that was this underground slave market. They encountered several Alec along the way, taking turns to defeat them. Finally, Sanji admitted to hearing the bellow of the Minotaur, following the sound and finally homing in on my location with my scream for help. "By the way, Robin," Nami nudged me. "Is what you really said true?" "What do you mean?" Nami smirked. "The man I love is dying." A flush crept up my cheeks. It was a lie. I was attempting the sympathy tactic. The navigator's eyes showed her as not believing me, but she let the subject drop. Her eyes found the swordsman's body, still suspended by my pairs of feet. "So what happened to you, then?" 24,601. We whipped around. The lead Alec was on his feet again, one hand against the wall for support. His red eyes glowed with anger as he raised an angry finger aimed at my chest. I met his eyes, unafraid. I was not alone anymore. I was not powerless. Yes, my wrists are broken. Yes, I'm burdened. No, I'm not alone. "You will come with me," the medical vampire hissed. "No one has ever escaped from this cavern, and I will not have our reputation tarnished by mere humans." He leapt forward, moving blindingly fast. An image flashed in my subconscious, of a man with long dark black hair, thin, uncaring eyes, and a pigeon perched on his shoulder. No, this Alec moved much faster than that. He left not even a dust of wind behind. My eyes scanned my surroundings, waiting for anything. A sharp pain exploded in my calf. With a cry, I collapsed to one knee, Zoro's body thudding to the ground as the feet supporting it disappeared. 2 bite wounds oozed a purple liquid, running down the back of my leg and pooling around my ankle. "Robin-chan!" Sanji yelled. "Robin!" Nami cried. I gripped the puncture wounds as the Alec reappeared where he had been standing before, wiping the back of his hand across his black lips. "Give that a few minutes to set," he smiled evilly. "And we'll be on our way." The other Alec slowly began to regain consciousness, standing on one another for support, yet still as angered as the first. Shabian's eyes were narrow with hate, and I pitied him. The vampires advanced, reaching out their hands for us. Nami raised her Klimatact, but it was quickly knocked from her hands by a swipe quicker than you could blink. Sanji looked slightly unsteady on his feet, blood loss was finally getting to him. Even with these Nakama, we were still disadvantaged. I closed my eyes. Please, I prayed. If there is such a thing as God on this island, please. Help us. Come here, 24,601. Light exploded in the room, penetrating every dark corner and making the entire corridor burst with white. The Alex screeched as the brightness burned their skin, ducking to hide behind the huge mass that was the still unconscious Minotaur. Sanji gathered Nami and I in his arms, turning his back to take the full blast of the light and protect us. His hand brushed against my wrists, and another flare of pain raced up my arms. I had almost forgotten my wrists were shattered. I disregarded the pain as my eyes fixed on Zoro, the light making his pale face even more devoid of color, looking like one of the Ghost Princess's negative ghosts. I looked for that telltale flash of green that I had cherished on this journey, but none caught my eye. The warmth from my back was gone again. The white retracted, gathering into one tall mass near the center of the room, in the view of everyone around it. All pairs of eyes stared, transfixed at the shining column. A straw hat stood slowly, me leaning on Sanji's shoulder for support. My calf was completely numb, I couldn't feel it. The light turned steamy as if vaporizing all the moisture in the air. The mist curled from the source like smoke from a fire, twisting and curling gracefully like ballet dancers. The peak of the source began to spark with tiny stars, and as we watched, the sparks expanded, sliding down the tall column of light, transforming it into a human being. Sanji tensed, his eyes wider than bowling balls. His cheeks turned hot, and he swallowed sharply. Am I dead? He whispered. Did I die and go to heaven? He might certainly have been close. The sparks finally reached the person's feet, dissipating into the hard stone ground and completing the transformation. Standing before us now was a beautiful woman, dressed in an elegant gown of ivory silk, twisting around her feet as it was blown by a non-existent breeze. Long white hair fell in waves down her back, perfectly crimped bangs on framing her face like a portrait frame. Around her neck hung a necklace of pure diamond, matching the gems dangling from her ears. A circlet of silver adorned her head, an emerald hanging as a bead over her forehead, like a bindi. When she opened her eyes, the pure blueness of them reminded me of the cerulean sky after a storm. Sanji collapsed, his breathing increasing dangerously. I swayed, unsteady on my feet, but finding support with the wall. Blood seeped from the cook's nose, staining his chin as his eyes rolled up inside his head, falling back against the cold ground. A masochistic grin plastered itself to his lips, his one visible eye transforming into a rapidly beating heart. Nami knelt by his side, rolling her eyes and attempting to revive the decommissioned cook. I stood my ground, and watched as the woman turned her head first to the Alec, eyes stern. She kept her hands folded in front of her, but I could see them tense with her gaze. The Alec who had threatened me stood from his spot, looking apologetic. My lady, he said, somewhat insincerely, and bowed low at the waist. What honor brings you here? Lady Freya sends me, the woman said, her voice like bells. She has heard the cry and sends me to collect. Is she a Valkyrie? I wondered in awe, unable to take my eyes from the sight. Her eyes turned to me. Yes, I am. You will refer to me as Antinodia. She's telepathic. I marveled as Antinodia returned her gaze to the groveling Alec. They will come with me, she said. All three. Nami spoke up. Yes, you, the other woman, and the dead man. The blonde stays behind. Why? Nami said harshly. We all go, or none at all. No living man may enter our kingdom of Valhalla, Antinodia explained, not bothering to contain the slight harshness in her tone. Our world is a place where those chosen among the slain of battle may become the warriors of Valhalla. The Valkyrie choose only the finest of men's souls, for them to join us in the above palace. She smiled coyly. We serve mead to them, among other things they desire. I shifted restlessly on my feet. Those slain in battle. My eyes found Zoro again. Does sacrificing yourself when no one is around make you worthy? I don't care what you serve them. Nami growled, standing up from the cook's side. Sanji was mumbling something incoherent under his breath, that goofy smile still etched in his features. I caught something along the lines of, "Oh angels in heaven, come to me, with those huge boobs of yours. Either Sanji-kun goes with us, or you don't get anything." Antinodia grimaced, not a good expression on a face such as hers. I could almost see the gears turning in her brain. What to do, what to do. Finally, she let out a light sigh. Very well. She raised her hands to the ceiling, closing her eyes and moving her lips silently. A beam of pure sunlight pierced the earth, shining in a perfect circle on the floor in front of us. Antinodia gestured to the light. Please, proceed. Sanji. Nami slapped him. Get up. It was no use. Resigning herself, Nami hooked her arms around his armpits and dragged him inside the light beam. In a flash, the navigator and chef disappeared. Where did they go? I asked. Valhalla, was the concise reply. The body. Antinodia raised her hand, and the swordsman's body suddenly levitated into the air, floating toward us and into the light. Phoom. Gone. It was my turn. I took a step forward, but I suddenly felt something latch onto my shoulder, and I stumbled, tumbling backward into the light. I caught a glimpse of burning red eyes full of hate before the world flashed into white, and I felt the sensation of falling. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is the stuff of legends by 1004 Angel. Chapter 10 No More Pain. There is someone I must meet again. And until that day, not even death itself can take my life away. Roronoa Zoro. Zoro Pa. Where the hell are they? I whipped around another corner, skidding to a halt just before I overshadowed some abnormally tall man covered in scars. His nails were ridiculously long too, like claws. He was yelling at a tiny wrinkled man creature in a door to what I assumed was a pawnshop of some sort, his pointed teeth bared and his lip curling. I backed away from him and took off again down the street, my eyes scanning each face for those somewhat familiar features. The stubby man jabbed his gnarly finger at his aggressor, yelling something about their company not selling goblin-made fang and claw accessories. I was growing desperate. With only the memories of something called a Davy back fight in my head, it was difficult to remember exactly what their names were. It was impossible to overshadow one of these creatures to search their memories of having heard that name, or where the owner of said title would be heading. But I could only recall S and N. Samantha and Nick, Shinji and Neji. Wrong gender. I was ready to claw my own eyes out with frustration, but not before I reminded myself that I would remember when I saw them. Even if I couldn't remember their names, I knew they were my only hope. I remembered they were my nakama, and that they were powerful enough to help me rescue Raven. If that was her name, I couldn't recall. It was scary, not knowing the names of my nakama. I remembered Frankie and Brooke, but how long until they slipped from my grasp? I was so caught up in my worrying, I almost missed the party of 8 strolling leisurely through the center of the town. I stopped just before overshadowing a deathly pale guy wrapped in a black hoodie, analyzing the tallest 2 of the 8. Beaten up, bruised, bleeding, limping, in the girl's case sobbing, the 2 wobbled along, tied and gagged and basically dragged behind the 5 miniaturized men strutting proudly behind their leader. I recognized the lead dwarf. He was the one Orin had called Gark. He was the guy who had captured Sandy and Namizo. My eyes found the blonde and redhead again. Yes, there was no way I could forget how much that stupid eyebrow pissed me off. I grinned stupidly and ran up to meet them, feeling like a shit ton of weight was suddenly lifted from my shoulders, only to be replaced with yet another shit ton of problems. The cook and navigator looked horrible, both bruised and bleeding and looking generally like they'd just endured a hurricane with nothing but an umbrella. Sandy's shoes were gone, and 2 thick gashes oozed red liquid on his feet. Nana was lying curled in a ball on a wooden cart much too small for her body. Blood was leaking into her eyes from a cut on her temple, but that was the worst of her injuries. Her Climatact was gone, and that could prove to be problematic. I followed the party for a long time, unable to figure out what to do. At one point, one of the dwarves had pulled back his cloak, and I spotted the bright blue that was Nana's weapon. Since, I had been concocting a plan to somehow wrestle the device from his belt, but unfortunately, every plan involved overshadowing the dwarf, and I didn't feel like having my height like that. Suddenly, Sandy collapsed to one knee, his head bowed as he heaved in a ragged breath. The dwarf holding the Climatact beat him round the head with a club, and spots of red littered the dirt between the cook's knees. An idea slowly morphed inside my head, and I stepped forward to overshadow the resting chef. A hot feeling spread throughout Sandy's body. Damn, it's sweltering, the blonde stressed. Since when was it this hot? Sandy, I could feel the sweat starting to slide between the shoulder blades. I was curious as to why the cook had suddenly started sweating. It hadn't happened other times when I overshadowed people. Still, I was in his body for a reason. To the best of my ability, I connected my and Sandy's mind so our thoughts were shared. I remembered the path Raven and I had gone before we had been separated by that stupid rock. Right, left, right again, no wait, it was a left. Through a sewer, another left. What the hell? Sandy's brain was torn between fighting off the connection and figuring out what it meant. What the hell is this? A map. What for? Get up, said Gark, using the tip of his sword to tilt Sandy's my chin up to face him. I was distracted from my task, and the images faded as our thoughts were forced apart. From this angle, looking up at the menacing man, he looked like a shitty giant rather than a 3-foot dwarf. Still, a wave of anger and fear swept over Sandy and I. I took advantage of the emotions and channeled this anger into forcibly diverting my host's gaze from the leader and over at the one who had slugged him over the head, eyes finding the Climatact hidden beneath the cloak. There, Sandy's brain clicked. Now that he knew the location of that damn thing, he could get it himself. I withdrew from the cook and stood back to watch, arms crossed lazily across my chest. Santa lurched to his feet, swaying. Even with my limited memories of the man, I could tell immediately, his unsteady stance was an act. I couldn't tell how, but I just knew. He took one step forward, and collapsed again to his hands and knees, elbows digging into the hard sandy street. Gark growled something in a weird language to his subordinates, who advanced on the fallen pirate with menacing glares. His face shadowed by his hair, Santa's lips curled into a smile. In one fluid motion, he rose to his hands and spread his legs far out to either side, twisting in a circle. Party table kick course. The dwarves yelled as dirty, bloody feet crashed into their faces. The ones who didn't get kicked were suddenly lifted into the air as the ropes wrapped tightly around Santa's ankles began to whip around rapidly, the dwarf still attached on the other end. Several rope burns later, all dwarves but 3 lay scattered in the street. The dwarf in possession of the Climatact had landed a foot away from Sandy, now finishing the move and landing in a crouch, his eyes fixated on the blue tube tucked into the man's belt. The weight on his legs gone, Sandy walked easily over and plucked the weapon from its captor. Gark and his subordinates stood open-mouthed at the display of power, obviously under the impression both their captives were decommissioned. Damn, Sandy muttered, examining the ropes around his wrists. They had loosed slightly from the attack, but now they suddenly tightened around his hands, skin rubbed red and raw. If that Marimo were here, he could snap these in an instant. His expression turned thoughtful. Maybe I should work on some upper body strength. Hold it, Gark interrupted, finally coming to his senses and aiming his crossbow at Sandy's chest. Put down the weapon, and I won't kill you. Nami-san, Sandy said, kneeling by the orange-haired woman lying on the wooden cart. Are you alright? I think so, she moaned as he began to untie her wrists. You, pay attention to me, Gark screeched, loosing the arrow. Sandy barely dodged, the shaft slicing open a new gash on his upper arm. The blonde curled his lip, dropping the rope that had once bound Nancy's wrists and launching himself at Gark. The dwarves on either side of him leapt in his path as if to stop him, but with one kick, the enraged chef sent them hurtling across the street. She quickly did away with the ropes around her legs, standing shakily. Hang on just a moment longer, Sanji-kun, she said, prying her Climatact from his hands and pulling out one end and twisting it rapidly in a circular motion. The small bulb on the end began crackling with electricity, casting shadows eerily across the navigator's face. This bastard needs to be taught what happens when you mess with pirates. Gark backed up a step. The menacing aura he'd had when I'd first saw him had completely vanished. A false show, probably only put on for his subordinates. Or it could also be he was truly scared. Whatever the reason, he wasn't planning on putting his full obligation into the fight. I curled my lip. He wasn't even worth fighting if he talked big and didn't follow up with it. Nenji apparently didn't understand the value of not fighting someone who ran away. Swing arm, she yelled, and 10 seconds saw the slave driver collapsed on the ground, his skin black and charred, tiny sparks of electricity arcing through his body. She stuck her tongue out at him and set to work on Sandai's bound hands. His eyes turned a beating heart inside his head as if her touch set his nerves on fire. Bastard, arrow cook fawning over women at a time like this. Necessary? I think not. He rubbed his wrists to get the blood flowing again, ignoring the raw and irritated skin in that area. Nami-san, he said, taking her gently by the arm and pulling her into an alley. A crowd had gathered around their battle site, and I could hear the whispers of the creatures as the pirates stole away quickly. Well, if they're not registered with the ALEC, then we're technically not obligated to catch them. Why get my hands dirty? They're obviously strong, they'd just escape again. Leave them be. ALEC. One of the dwarves had mentioned Raven being one. What was an ALEC, anyway? Well, whatever it was, it, or they, was obviously important to this island. I added them to my mental list of possible threats on this godforsaken island and followed Nancy and Santiago through an alley, where they collapsed to catch their breath, chests heaving and legs shaking from exhaustion. Santiago began to tell his comrade about the map I had planted inside his head. It was so weird, he was saying. It was telling me where to go. Having visions inside your head isn't a good sign, Sanji-kun, she said skeptically. But for some reason, I trust it, Santiago said firmly. So I'm going to follow it. She sucked her bottom lip, but did nothing to sully him. So where do we go? His face blanked. I don't remember. I rolled my eyes, reminding myself that slamming my head against a wall in frustration wouldn't result in anything constructive. I breathed deeply and once again descended, the green glow of my body fading away as Santiago and I merged into one person. Using the same technique as before, I linked our minds and let my memories flow forth. Wait, Nami-san, I remember. The bank of a river, a bridge stretching across the rapids and letting off to where a town could be seen through the trees. Tiny huts with thatched roofs, 2-story buildings with flowerpots hanging on the windowsill, and advertising taverns or shops. Creatures emerged from the shops and houses. One woman walking past held up an umbrella to shield herself from the sun, her skin deathly pale and her eyes glowing red. I fast-forwarded through the journey across town, sometimes backtracking when I thought I missed something important. I paid no attention to Santiago's struggles to grasp all the information running through his head. My lips curled into a grimace, and the eye was screwed up tight in concentration. The dwarfs finally pulled off the main road and made their way through an alley between 2 pawnshops. Down a steep flight of stairs, 2 lefts and a right, through a sewer and finally coming to a door built into a stone slab. Orin stepped forward and rapped the hilt of his sword against the stone 4 times in rapid succession. There. Found it. The directions to the boulder from the main road. I wouldn't be able to help from where we were currently, but find those 2 pawnshops, and everything would be okay. Is this the way to find Robin-chan? My host thought, and my forehead pounded with headache. I didn't respond. I was focused on developing a new ability as a ghost. At first I assumed I could only overshadow living beings while they were immobile. But if this were to work, I needed to be able to move with them and not be left behind. Santiago finally got to his feet. So did I. He walked forward, and so did I. The next 30 minutes consisted of stumbling around Lauren, trying to figure out motor skills and look for 2 pawnshops at the same time. This was no easy task, because Sandy continuously looked at his feet like he somehow had forgotten to walk and had to reteach himself. Finally, Nancy's expert eye caught the sight of 2 small little shops nestled together, their shop signs banging together in a light wind. I recognized them from when Raven had taken away, and I somehow steered my host in that direction. I couldn't help but smile as I finally beheld the giant boulder through which Raven had been abducted. Nancy and Santiago exchanged confused glances. "Where is this place?" the orange-haired girl asked, running a hand across the hard rock. "No idea," the chef replied, just as perplexed. "This is where the map says to go. Find Raven," I said. "Whoa, Santiago," I stumbled back a step, I whined. "What's wrong?" I heard Zoro's voice in my head. "What? That's impossible." A shake of the head. "No." In the cyclone, I heard it the first time. He told me to turn around, and there you and Robin-chan were. At first I thought I was going insane. But twice now. "Ghosts don't exist, Sanji-kun," Nancy chided. "Disregarding that pink-haired girl's negative ghosts, there's no such thing." "Find Raven," I said again. "There, again. What does he say?" "Find Raven." "Raven." Santiago, I nodded. "But we don't know a raven." Something went wrong with my legs. I suddenly felt like water, or a flimsy strand of noodles. The world began spinning, and my vision was suddenly spotted with red. "She sounds beautiful." "Damn it, Santiago, just follow my instructions and do as I say." "That's a new insult, you bastard. I'll get you back for that. Do as I say, dartboard, and look at that shitty rock." I was proud of myself for remembering that particular insult I always used. Satisfied with the way Sandy's eyes rolled and finally settled on the huge slab in front of us, I left him with one last statement. "Knock 4 times. The answer is, right side of the white oak. Find Raven." My job done, I withdrew from the cook's mind and left his body, standing off to the side to watch. I wouldn't hesitate this time. I would go straight through. If I was stopped again, I would go through with one of the crew. Whatever it took. I won't stand for being separated from everyone now. Larry and the rest of the crew were counting on us, and I didn't want to be absent when our goal was achieved. "What are you doing, Sanji-kun?" Nancy queried as Sanji raised his hand and rapped sharply on the rock 4 times in rapid succession. Just as it had been, the voice on the other side spoke up. But as it had not been, it said, "How does the satyr like his wine?" Sandy opened and closed his mouth rapidly while I raged silently. What the hell was this guy getting at, asking a different question? "Peeled and pressed," said Neji suddenly and confidently. There was a pause, and the boulder began to slide open again. When looked at curiously, she only smiled. "Robin showed me this book once on an ancient civilization called Greece. Their mythology had a god called Dionysus, the god of wine, and he likes his grapes peeled and pressed before being turned to wine." I kind of just blurted it out. "Well, whatever the case, let me go in first," Santiago whispered as the dark abyss of beyond the rock once again yawned its giant maw. "I'll protect you." No complaining from me, I heard Nancy mutter as she and Sandy entered the dark room. Suddenly remembering my purpose for experimenting with Sandy's body, I ran up and overshadowed the cook right before he entered the darkness. A hard force met me as he passed a certain point. I struggled to keep myself lodged inside him, linking minds to strengthen the bond. Without meaning to, I suddenly dove into Sandy's own memories, those images flashing through my mind. Sandy himself recoiled a bit as childhood memories suddenly resurfaced for no apparent reason. For only a second, I watched Sandy's childhood whip across my vision. Huge ships in a raging storm, marooned on an island for weeks with no food, the 10-year-old child looking like a skeleton from Thriller Bark, the old pirate missing his leg. The resistance suddenly disappeared and I hurtled forward, propelled out of the cook's body and falling flat on my back wherever the hell I was. I didn't move. I now understood why this guy was such a stickler when it came to wasting food. A feeling down in my gut told me I should feel sorry for anything stupid I might have said that offended him, but I forced myself to come to terms with that distracting feeling later. It was pitch black where I was slowly sitting up, the only light being the small ray of sun bleeding through the closing boulder behind us. I let out a sharp laugh. Yes, infiltration successful. Sandy looked a little dazed at the sudden flashback of buried memories, but he quickly resumed his usual stance, but slightly hunched over, as the boulder slid closed behind Nancy, plunging everyone into darkness. The ceiling was low, and there was pain to be met if a human stood up to full height. "How many in your party?" said the voice from before, a lamp flickering to life. "2, said Nancy, taking the light source from the weird-looking dwarf who possessed it. She knelt so the 2 were at eye level. The dwarf man looked perplexed at the sudden appearance of 2 raggedy humans and not a band of dwarven slave drivers. A sly smile curled Nenji's lips. "Would you be so kind as to tell us the most recent human brought in?" she asked, voice soft and seductive. It was that same tone she used to bargain with salesmen on prices, the same one she used to manipulate men into getting what she wanted. The dwarf was no exception. A tall woman with dark hair, he said, voice about half an octave higher than usual. Oren's gang continued down to the next level for the Yalan inspections. Robin Kwan. Santiago noodled down in the direction the dwarf had indicated. I'm coming for you. I lost count of how long we roamed those corridors and passages, looking for a familiar nakama. Only thanks to Namazu's stealth, we only encountered a few groups of tall pale-skinned people, all with red eyes and black lips. They were easy to pick off, but with each one, Sandy seemed to lose even more power in his kicks, complaining that his boots were missing and he was lacking in strength thereof. Nancy took over then, electrocuting the creatures that attacked them with fangs bared until Sandy had regained enough strength to continue fighting. When interrogating the defeated vampires, none claimed to have seen a tall human female with dark hair. This led to more random running until the entire cycle repeated again. Finally, one particular vampire claimed to have taken stock 24,601 inches down to the stock cells 45 minutes ago. Take us, Neji ordered, and the man grudgingly began walking back the way he had been walking when we had almost quite literally walked into him. Suddenly, a roar echoed through the underground tunnels, pounding on our ears and ringing in our eardrums. It was a roar made by some massive creature of immense power, and excitement bubbled in my gut. I would give anything to fight that monster right now. Unfortunately, my katana had been left on the ship during the damn cyclone. What's that noise? Nancy screamed over the bellow. It's the Minotaur, said our captive vampire. He's located a runaway. Could it be Robin Chan? Santiago yelled. The vampire was looking curious, the sound not dulling his sense of hearing. He cocked his head, cast one last glance at us, and took off down the hall, leaping around a corner and out of sight. After him, Nancy yelled as the bellow began to fade away into only a distant echo. Santiago and I needed no further prompting. The three of us took off after the vampire, feet pounding into hard-packed earth beneath us. We immediately lost sight of our escaped prisoner, but that did not deter us from twisting random down-branching corridors, backtracking at dead ends and dodging more vampires. No more bellows echoed through the corridors, and I slowly began to accept we were dead. Well, they were dead. Technically, I would be, too, shit. We would all die and never come back. Ever. Nancy and Sandy seemed to be having similar thoughts. They leaned hard against the walls, breathing hard and staring at the ground between their shaking knees. The blackness suddenly began creeping up on my mind again, signaling the beginning of another wave of amnesia. I fought against it, but apparently, even in this ghostly state, my mind can become exhausted, and I was soon overcome. A tall man with a sleeping mask, a woman with dark hair slowly being frozen into a statue, a raging train across the ocean, fire burning as men with funny goggles crumpled under my blades, a ram's head figurehead ship rocked by the power of a long-nosed man and a raven-haired man with a red vest, standing on a tree outside an ornate building, crashing through walls and watching a woman with long black hair jump from a window, boarding what looked like a shark painted on a train, blasting through a massive wave. Damn, everything before Annie's lobby was gone. This was getting close. What was that blue-haired guy's name again? Fred. Fancy. Frank. I don't remember. I can't go any further, Sanji-kun, Nancy huffed. Robin Chan needs us, though, he said back, but by the underlying tone in his voice, I could tell he was at his limit as well. My ears suddenly picked up someone speaking, and close. I strained my ears harder to make out what the speaker was saying. It was hard to discern through the huffing and puffing of the exhausted pirates. I moved a little away from them to better listen. 3. It was a masculine voice. The rough sound a lot of the vampires had when we had questioned them. I need to reach the Valkyrie. This voice was feminine. It was eerily familiar too, like someone I knew. I racked my brain to place the voice as the woman continued speaking. Help me find the Pone Cube of Cain. Raven. It was Raven. I ran forward, following the sound of her and that other voice. They were so close, it was like she was standing right in front of me. I could hear. Just a little closer, one more step. 2. He was counting down. I didn't want to know what would happen if he reached 0. I ran harder, faster, stronger. Finally, whipping around a corner, I came across a group of 10 pale-skinned vampires with their backs to me. The woman they were staring at, it was Raven, and she was yelling again, tears leaking from her eyes. The man I love is dying and the only way to save him is to take him to the Valkyrie. Please, help me. I skidded to a stop, my entire gaseous body going completely numb in shock and surprise. What did she just say? 1. Raven's eyes were shaded by her matted hair. She raised her wrists over her chest, and I shivered at the odd way they were angled. What had she done to herself? I wouldn't let anyone let those kinds of things happen to them, not for my sake. I wanted to move forward and help, but my limbs refused to move. Why did I leave Sanjino and Nenji behind? Trienta. Roobin Quan. The vampires and I reacted simultaneously. We turned as one, eyes widening as we beheld an approaching teenaged orange-haired female, her climatact sparking to life in her hands. I didn't bother to dodge as she loosed a ball of crackling electricity into the cloud that had suddenly appeared above our heads. If anything, the lightning attack seemed to rejuvenate me, fill me with energy I had been lacking. I waded through the smoking vampire bodies littering the ground, moving to stand next to Raven, who had draped herself across a body supported by disembodied feet to protect it. A small smile creased my features as I recognized the hair, the earrings, the strange eyebrows and everything along with it. My physical body was safe. How? I had no idea and had no intention of asking. "You bastards," said Sanjino's voice from behind the curtain of steam. "Trying to hurt my Robin-chan. Your knight in shining armor is here, my princess." "Shush, Sanji-kun," said Nancy's voice. "The others will hear us." The moment the navigator and cook became visible through the fog, they and the archaeologist ran together and embraced tightly, burying themselves in one another like they would never let go. I longed to join that group hug, sort of, but this ability was still far from my reach. My eyes found my body's forearm. Raven began to sob quietly into Santiago's shoulder, and I felt a pang of jealousy in my heart. That should be me. She should be crying into my shoulder, if crying at all. The blonde looked too happy with the older woman leaning against him like that. A smile appeared on Raven's lips, and I realized she was crying tears of joy. Would she cry those tears of joy when, if, I returned? If I were to assume not, I would be kidding myself. The man I love is dying. The straw hats parted, holding themselves at arm's length to check over themselves and look for any damages. Raven was wearing new clothes, very revealing clothes. It looked nice on her, though. The cloth around her chest was fraying around the edges, but it was still a nice color and somehow managed to not slide down when she moved. Her long skirt nicely fit her wide hips, and a rip in the fabric showed a small cut midcalf. She was still lovely. Lovely. How did you get here? Raven asked her nakama, curiosity and slight exhaustion lacing her voice. I tuned out the story of our perilous journey here, I knew it already. Sandy decided to omit small parts of the story, but I held nothing against him. To me it didn't matter how we had gotten here, but the fact that we were here now made the difference. I examined Raven's face as the cook and cartographer exchanged roles in the storytelling. Her expression morphed into one of surprise, curiosity, and hope when the story came to breaking through the boulder entrance thing. It was impossible to read her thoughts by only observing her face. I had half a mind to overshadow her, but thought better of it. I would leave her to her thoughts and whatever else she was feeling, emotionally. The story complete, Sanjino went over to stand by the Alec, bending low to poke at the one who had gotten away from us. He had run away to join his own comrades here, I knew it. I swear, when I returned physically, I would kick his ass for running away. A lot of trouble could have been saved if he had just. By the way, Robin, Nancy nudged her friend. Is what you really said true? What do you mean? The orange-haired teen smirked. The man I love is dying. I spotted red creeping up Robin's cheeks. It was an awfully suspicious color. It was a lie. I was attempting the sympathy tactic. Namizo obviously didn't believe the historian, and neither did I. I know what I heard, and it is incredibly difficult to imitate an emotion like that. I would have liked to continue that interrogation, but the navigator let the subject drop. Her eyes roved over to where my body still lay suspended by several pairs of feet. So what happened to you, then? She asked. 24,601. We whipped around. One of the vampires was on his feet again, barely. He held one wall with a hand, his red eyes glowing with rage as he raised an index finger and aimed it directly over Raven's heart. She did not look away from him, rather fixed her cerulean eyes on his red ones without so much as a twitch of a finger. A confident and unwavering air surrounded her, and I liked that. She didn't need anyone's help protecting herself, but she was always willing to accept it. You will come with me, the vampire hissed. No one has ever escaped from this cavern, and I will not have our reputation tarnished by mere humans. He leapt forward, moving blindingly fast. Sanjino, Nancy and Raven whipped around, unable to locate the vanished mythological creature. But I could see him. He moved like an apparition, his entire form shimmering like he and I stood on opposite ends of a raging fire, the smoke distorting our features. He moved behind them constantly, not letting himself stay anywhere but directly behind them. Raven paused, and he took his opportunity. Squatting, he suddenly sank his teeth into Raven's calf. She screamed, collapsing to one knee and holding her hands over the two puncture wounds now oozing a deep purple liquid. With a thump, my body hit the ground as the feet supporting it vanished. Robin-chan, Sanji yelled. Robin, Nami cried. The vampire shimmered back into existence before us, a coy smile curling his lips as he swiped the back of his hand across the black flesh. Give that a few minutes to set, he smiled evilly. And we'll be on our way. A rage boiled up inside me. Anyone else who so much as thinks of harming Raven again will have me to deal with when I get back. I don't continue risking my life constantly for her for nothing. Granted, I don't remember any of it, but I knew I had done it multiple times and on several occasions. I did not take kindly to those who hurt my nakama. The other vampires slowly began to regain consciousness, standing on one another for support, yet still as angered as the first. The one who had managed to escape from us was supported by one of his comrades, his eyes narrow as he stared Raven down. Her eyes grew soft as she met his eyes, but they soon hardened again as the creatures advanced, reaching out for us. Nancy raised her Klimatak, but it was quickly knocked from her hands by a swipe quicker than a normal human could blink. Santiago looked slightly unsteady on his feet, blood loss was finally getting to him. Raven crossed her deformed wrists across her chest, wincing as they clicked briefly together. I berated myself. There was nothing I could do, nothing at all, and this was not looking good. They needed me, and I them. If they, died here, it would have been all for nothing, and Lucky would have to find himself a new cook, navigator, historian, and swordsman. Raven closed her eyes, sucking her bottom lip as if whispering her final prayer to any gods that even existed. Come here, 24,601. A flash of light lit the room, and I suddenly found my vision zooming out. Raven and the others grew smaller and smaller, white clouding my vision. I called out, wanting to return to my nakama below, but I was powerless against whatever force was pulling me up. All the weariness was drained from me, and I felt energized and ready for anything. Any cuts I should have would have been healed completely. I felt pure and fresh like a newborn baby. I felt no more pain. A soft voice echoed in my mind. You are awaited by the Valkyrie, it said. Welcome to Valhalla, welcome to your new home, welcome to forever. Chapter 11. Follow the wisdom of the heart. Wanting to become stronger for the sake of someone else. I've never thought of that before. Nico Robin. Robin Pa. Screaming filled my ears. Screams I knew all too well. It was the scream of someone dying, knowing that any breath could be their last, and watching their own flesh melt from their bones. It was the scream of a vanishing life. I knew that sound like the back of my hand. I've heard it once too often. But this time, I didn't know how to feel about it. Should I feel sorry for the one who had tried to murder me? Should I laugh at his screams of pain and death? I didn't. I only smiled sadly at the red eyes locked on mine as the skin around them turned papery and flaked from the body, floating away as the wind whipped them away. The scream echoed in my ears, the voice fading away as the creature's vocals were quite literally ripped from its throat. Even as its final moment of life approached, still those eyes bored into mine like a nail through wood. Analyzing my every thought, my every emotion, I hit the ground hard, all the air forced from my lungs in one huge gasp. Coughs escaped my throat, racking my entire body. Gentle hands wrapped around my shoulders and helped me into a sitting position as I slowly regained my breath. Thank you, I said. You're welcome, said Nami's voice, and I turned to smile at her. Instead my jaw dropped slightly and my eyes widened. The navigator had been completely cleansed of any and all injury. Her skin was shining and scratch-free, her hair put up in a nice bun with a circlet on her head similar to Antinodia's. She was now wearing a knee-length creamy-colored toga clipped over one shoulder with gold slippers on her feet. She simply radiated beauty. Looking down at myself, I saw that I, too, was dressed similarly, and my broken wrists were completely healed. My skin glowed faintly like I had a miniature sun beneath my skin. Robin-chan, Nami Swan, you look absolutely radiant, more beautiful than the goddess of beauty herself. I looked over at the lovesick chef. He, too, had been cleansed of wounds, but his mode of dress was much less modest. Only a short cloth was wrapped around his waist, leaving him completely bare-chested. You will stay silent, man, said the voice of Antinodia. I blinked into focus, looking at the Valkyrie standing a few feet away. She looked just as beautiful as she had down below, if not glowing a bit brighter. She looked forward over our heads. Take one moment to regain your balance. What pushed me inside the light beam? I asked, standing a bit unsteadily, and finding a light cloud below my feet. It was like being in Skypia again. And Alec, was a short answer. That beam purifies everything that enters it, nothing tainted may enter this world. Aluks are creatures of blood, it was vaporized instantly. That would explain the screaming in my healed wounds. I flexed my fingers, not quite convinced of the magic. I was a woman of knowledge and fact, not one who believes in petty magic tricks like this. Still, my wrists felt fine, and there was no denying the bones were not broken. But something felt off, not with my body, but with just the air surrounding us. The room we had landed in, the floor dusted with cloud, the 12 golden pillars holding up the pure gold dome of a roof, it was all very regal and realistic. But I couldn't put my finger on what was missing until I did a head count. Where's Zoro? I demanded, whirling on the Valkyrie, who was keeping her eyes trained on something behind me. I didn't care to turn. What have you done with him? Antinodia's eyes flicked to me. I don't know. I somehow managed to control my hysteria. If you don't tell me, I may have to force the answer out of you. She didn't bat an eye. I'm not in charge of the souls. If you have a complaint, find my sister Xian. She will help you. But that does not concern you. Lady Freya will speak to you first. I put on my sweetest smile. I refuse to see her until you tell me where Zoro is. Robin, Nami whispered when Antinodia didn't reply. Something's wrong with Sanji-kun. I looked at the blonde cook. His entire body was frozen in some sort of self-administered time lock. His eyes were wide and unblinking, jaw slack and immobile as his hands grabbed at his hair. I knew he wasn't dead, he had spoken a minute before. Had he seen something? Could it be important? I looked to follow the cook's gaze, inhaling a light breath when I beheld a tall woman leaning against a pillar. She had been silent and undetectable, listening in on our conversation. She was who Antinodia was staring at, a darker look shading the Valkyrie's eyes. The newcomer wore clothing similar to Antinodia, but her gown was knee-length and a sweet baby blue, tied off at the shoulder with laced sleeves. Her black hair was tied in a high ponytail, small strands of hair hanging down either side of her slim features. Her green eyes were shy and modest, but behind the veil of sweet there was sour. That is no way to speak to Ire. The girl whispered. Ire, you do not refer to us by true name outside of the trial room, Tufa, Antinodia snapped. I could have guessed. When I read the novel about the Valkyrie, the book had stated they rarely used their real names, preferring an alias. Ire must be Antinodia's true name. Tufa, the new Valkyrie no doubt, shuffled on her feet unsteadily. Lady Phrygia sent me. She wants the humans in her throne room as soon as possible. I maintained my smile, but inside I was fuming. I didn't want to go anywhere without knowing where Zoro was. For all I knew, he was burning in a fiery pit of death for all of eternity. Or maybe he was frolicking through a meadow of daises while singing a tone-deaf kumbaya. Both thoughts made me cringe. I couldn't decide which was worse. Well, wherever he was, he'd better not go and get himself lost, even though he's a body. Nami somehow managed to revive Sanji, who immediately swooned in front of Tufa, who inched quickly away from the erratic chef. She eventually turned and fled down a corridor from which I assumed she had arrived in the first place. Sanji noodled after her, yelling for his angel to wait. Nami took off after him, leaving Antinodia alone in the room with me. Without looking at the female warrior, I said, I don't trust you, Ire-san. Just to spite her, I used her true name. From an eye bloomed across the room, I noticed her lips tighten as it rolled off my tongue. I don't trust this Valhalla. And I just want to sum up the situation. Zoro is dead. It is just Nami, Sanji, and I. My Nakama's body and soul are missing. And as a result, that makes this simple. Very, very simple. Do you know why? Antinodia's voice was clipped. No. Because now, Ire-san, I looked at her over my shoulder, giving my best cross me and you die smile. There is no power on this earth that can stop me. I didn't wait for her reaction. I took long strides after the navigator and cook, leaving her in the dust. I was positive I had jolted the Valkyrie a little, but that was not my intention. What I had spoken was the truth. I would not stop until this entire land was turned over and Zoro's body recovered. I would locate this river Chai if I had to fight my way single-handed through a million foes. I would drag myself across deserts, hike mountains, and pass any test to see this through to the end. I didn't know any woman in the universe who wouldn't do the same for the man they loved. I caught up to Sanji and Nami, who were standing dumbfounded in the absence of Tufa, who had somehow disappeared, in front of a massive set of ornate silver doors, the hinges laced with gold. Inscribed into the entrance was a crescent moon with two swords crossed over it, a shield in the background. The symbol of the moon goddess. The doors swung inward as I approached, admitting us inside a tall corridor lined with stone. The ceiling slanted upward into a triangular shape with small windows to allow sunlight to illuminate the room. At the very end of the hall on a raised platform was positioned a decorated wooden chair, padded with goose feather pillows. Sitting on that throne was the nudist woman I had seen in a very long time. She wore only a single cloth draped over her shoulder and across her lap, barely covering her cleavage and leaving a good amount of it exposed. Long yellow hair fell in waves around her face, complementing her strangely dark eyes. Her legs were crossed daintily at the knee, and her skin shone with a soft lunar light. At her feet was a huge boar, its tusks wickedly sharp. Hanging above her head was a figurine of a horse in flight, its wings spread like a swan. This must be Lady Freya, I figured. Standing around her were 12 women. I recognized Antinodia and Tufa among them. They must be the entire Valkyrie family. A few girls had black hair, some brown, some blonde, and some white. Their eye color varied as well, most to fit the expressions on their faces. One girl with a huge shield strapped to her back held her brown hair up in a high ponytail with bangs on either side of her face, similar to Tufa. Her eyes were hard and unyielding, like a barricade against the enemy. However, another girl had her black hair short and close cropped, eyes black against her pale skin. A bow and quiver rested between her shoulder blades with swords strapped to her hips, which she fingered fondly. A stab of pain pierced my heart. Zoro caresses his swords in the same manner. The jittery adrenaline, just waiting for something bad to happen so you can cut things like a psychotic maniac. Which one of you pleaded for help? Lady Freya asked. Sanji collapsed again. It was a pity Chopper wasn't here. I hoped Sanji didn't die of blood loss if he continues nose bleeding like that. I stepped forward, smiling lightly again to quell my rising uneasiness. It was I. Thank you for rescuing us. I did not kowtow to her, as it would be proper. She didn't appear to notice or even care. I only replied for a single purpose, the goddess of the moon continued. Reginleaf tells me you desire something far more desirable than your own safety. Leaf, or who I assumed it was, dipped her head in a nod, her light pink hair falling in front of her dainty face. Forgive me for not introducing ourselves, Nami spoke up. She had given up on Sanji, who had fallen into unconsciousness again, and stood next to me confidently. I'm Nami, navigator for the Straw Hat Pirates. This is Nico Robin, an archaeologist. And that sorry lump over there is Sanji, the cook. We don't give our names to outsiders, the black-haired Valkyrie hissed, her eyes boring into my own. But Serena, a blue-haired girl whispered, quaking in her own sandals. We need tea too. Shut it, Atina, her sister snapped. Why not you? Another one groaned, flipping her short yellow hair out of her eyes and glaring at her sister with sharp green eyes. Put away that fierce attitude of yours and try to be quaint for once. You're pissing me off. Say that again, Aerith, I dare you. The sound of steel against sheath beat the air, and suddenly a broadsword blocked the Valkyrie siblings from tearing each other apart. The owner of the broadsword was a woman with deep purple hair, eyes like a hawk and her limbs bulging with muscles. Stop it, she ordered. Introduce yourselves to the guests. Serena folded her arms. Sangrier. This must be the trial room if they were using their official names. I felt a bit honored to witness this. I recognized the name the Valkyrie had used from the book I had read once. Very violent and cruel. Aerith stuck out her tongue. Raagrier. The bossy. Antinodia gave me a hard look. Ire. Help and mercy. The shielded Valkyrie didn't make eye contact. Randgrid. The shield destroyer. A tall Valkyrie dressed in simple battle attire with her red hair plaited down her back spoke up next. Gaul. Noise in battle. The girl whom Freya had spoken of came forward next. Leaf. Daughter of the gods. Another sister dressed similarly to Gaul, but more feminine-like, said, Hildur. Battle. Tufa whispered, Pone. Silence. A Valkyrie with dual swords at her hip introduced herself next. Skalmold. Sword time. The purple-haired woman who had broken up the fight sheathed her sword once she was sure her quarreling sisters had ceased their disagreement. Hijorprimiel. Please, call me Nakoma. It's easier. The sword warrioress. Atina, who had at first tried to calm Serena. Wrist. The quaking one. Finally, the only remaining Valkyrie muttered into the blade of the knife she was cleaning, Kara. The wild, stormy one. 12 Valkyrie. Just like in the legends and myths to which they belonged. Goddesses born to train the spirits of the dead for Ragnarok, the coming of the end of time. A dangerous group of women who would be difficult to defeat. Tell me where Zoro is. I demanded once the introductions had finally ceased. Who? She means the warrior who was summoned here, Antinodia explained. The one with the odd green hair. That's him, Nami confirmed. Where is he? Hildur raised her hat. I take care of them, she said. Is she Xian, whom Antinodia had told me to refer? I assumed so. Where did the body go? Where the rest of them go? Xian was refusing to be specific, and it was irking me to no end. I dare not reveal my inner turmoil and show weakness. Please, I tried to compromise. We need him too. A sudden breeze blew through the room, but there was nowhere for it to have come from. It smelled of the sea and salt and chocolate. And was that a rose petal? A large amount of rose petals had suddenly appeared inside the throne room from thin air, riding a salty sea breeze in a tall pillar a few feet away. It grew so dense it was impossible to see what may be inside the pillar, but all was revealed a few seconds later when the wind vanished, the petals floated to the floor and another woman stepped forward, mumbling about dramatic entrances. Sanji, who had just apparently awoken from his stupor, took one look at the newcomer, erupted into another nosebleed and fainted again. Nami facepalmed. This woman was different from the Valkyrie. I knew immediately she wasn't from the same mythology. Her face couldn't be pinned down to one exact form, it was constantly shifting into different ones, but each face was equally perfect in beauty. Now, she had long salmon pink hair and blue eyes, a few freckles dotted across her nose and a flower pinned above her ear. Then, she suddenly transformed into a vision of my mother, complete with those blue eyes that could read my mind. Nami, who was standing beside me, saw something else. Belmir, she whispered. I didn't know who Belmir was, but I assumed it was someone Nami loved very much. The woman was dressed in a pink floor-length gown, sleeveless, and coming together at her shoulder with a brooch shaped as a myrtle. Freya, the woman said with a coy smile. The addressed moon goddess tightened her hold on her armrest. Lighten up and let the heroes have their companion. And why should I? Because they love him, and he loves them. I've been watching this endeavor for the past few hours and must say, I think they deserve it. Venus, Freya said, her tone dangerous. The woman flicked her hair behind her ear, flashing a pure white smile. Oh, come on, Freya. I'm the goddess of love, this is my area of expertise. I gasped. Venus, love, could it be? What's up, Robin? Nami asked curiously. Remember that book I showed you about Greece? I said, and the navigator nodded. Well, when that civilization fell, another one rose to power and adopted its mythology, just adapted it a little to be more warlike. In this new power, Rome, their goddess of love was Venus, adopted from the Greek Aphrodite. Her kingdom is that of breaking couples apart or bringing them together. My voice softened to a whisper. Venus winked. Spot on, princess. Only the concept of love can't be adapted so easily. I just had my name switched. But what is an angel such as yourself doing here, my lovely? Sanji swooned. I hadn't realized he'd regained consciousness, and started when his voice echoed in the throne room. He appeared to be emotionally stable now, wiping the blood off his face with the back of his sleeve and standing shakily. An elegant throne suddenly sprouted from the ground in which Venus lounged lazily, examining her already perfect fingernails. It gets so boring sometimes. There's nothing to do, until you guys land on this island, and it's just one thing after another. The goddess squealed. It's so cute I have to get in on it. I had a feeling down in my gut that I knew exactly what she was talking about. I wouldn't admit it aloud, though. Not until she said it first. But the goddess of love was not my priority. I need to find Zoro's body and take it to the River Chai, whatever the cost. Maybe I could manipulate Venus into revealing its location. Venus don't know, I said in my best convince the enemy of my loyalty voice. I must ask, have you heard of the River Chai? Lady Freya's eyes narrowed, as if I had suddenly crossed a very dangerous line. Venus, however, picked at her lip in curiosity. River Chai, she plopped her fist into her palm. Oh, yeah, you're talking about that legend I wrote millennia ago, back when I was Greek. I had forgotten. What? Nami and Sanji screeched. You wrote the legend. Venus flashed a peace symbol. Of course, it was supposed to help a good friend of mine, but the poor buffoon didn't make it in time. I'm surprised it survived this long. What is this legend of which you speak? Hissed Serena, hand caressing the hilt of her sword as if itching to unsheath it. Were the Valkyrie unknowing of this legend? If so, it could prove to our advantage to manipulate this. I didn't open my mouth, however. I would need to select my words carefully if this tactic was to prove beneficial. I kept one eye trained on her as my attention was slightly diverted to the navigator, who had completely discarded the Valkyrie's query. Please, tell us. Nami pleaded with the love goddess. What do we need to do? Venus turned her pure blue eyes on mine, and I had a sudden wave of memories flood my mind of my mother looking at me in that same way. I lost all concentration on Serena and focused on that sweet happiness my mother had of seeing her daughter again, but also a sorrow just under the surface because of the consequences. It was a bittersweet sight. Robin already knows, but unfortunately, you'll have to come to the Greek pillar. I wasn't allowed to bring my River Chai when my alliance switched to Rome. But to do that, you need the warrior, Lady Freya's voice said sternly, and I started. She had been silent, and I had forgotten she was in the room. All eyes turned to the moon goddess's coy smile. And we will not give him up. What do you want? Nami shouted. We'll give you anything. Anything is lofty word, child, Venus said quietly. Anything, includes your life. Nami suddenly seemed to realize the vastness of her word, and slapped a hand to her lips, her eyes wide with deep understanding of her desperation. Lady Freya didn't seem fazed by Nami's actions, but merely pursed her lips and drummed her fingers on the armrest of her throne. She appeared to be concocting a price, and I wasn't buying. Seeming to come to a conclusion, she opened her mouth to speak, but I interrupted her. Show him to us first, I bargained. Prove that you have him. Freya's eyes narrowed. She raised finger and gestured. The black-haired girl Xian came forward, the one in charge of the souls. She reached to the side, and I was impressed when her entire forearm disappeared into what appeared to be a pocket in the air, a portal. An alternate dimension, maybe. Xian's eyes widened slightly. A vein tensed in her bicep, and she suddenly began to grapple with herself as if her arm was suctioned to whatever was on the other side of that gate. But it wasn't stuck, because she pulled it free with ease and stuck her other arm inside, movements frantic. What's wrong? I asked sweetly, hiding my own sudden flood of worry. It's gone, Xian strained. It's what? The entire room screamed. All but Venus, I noticed, who had hidden a sly smile behind her hand. The remaining 11 Valkyrie flocked around their sister, bombarding her with questions, to which she merely shook her head sadly. I kept an eye on the love goddess, who was suppressing her laughter with one hand. My eyes narrowed. My suspicions were confirmed as she suddenly spoke up above the clamor. It's not gone, she giggled. Only stolen. At the word, all life in the room fell silent. The Valkyrie glared at the Roman intruder, eyes like daggers. I didn't move. I had suspected this. Venus's body language said all that needed to be spoken. She held up her hand, and with a poof of rose petals, Zoro's body appeared in midair, frozen in the exact position he had been in when he had been suspended by my feet back in the Aluk stock cells. Was it rigor mortis, or a frozen state in time? Whatever the case, the goddess held him captive, and this I would not stand for. Return him at once, I demanded. But he's dead, Venus said, her voice layered with sickly sweet oil. Why do you want this thing? It can't do anything, just lays there and decays. But this, however, is what you want. In Venus's other hand popped a life-size jar, complete with an airtight lid. There didn't appear to be anything inside of it, but when I looked harder, the glass tinted a deep green, and a handprint suddenly pressed itself to the inside of the jar, fingers curled in frustration. My heart began to beat faster. Zoro. But you don't want one or the other, do you? The Roman goddess continued. You want both. Put the soul and body together and voila. You get your swordsman back. There's no such thing as a free lunch, I figured. Name your price. In a poof, the body and soul jar disappeared. Venus leaned over on her knee, resting her chin in the palm of her hand. Just you, Robin sweetie, she smiled. I have a test for you. A test, I repeated. A nod. Yes. Pass my test, I'll give you directions to the River Chai, where sweet Zoro-san is waiting for you right now. Pass, fine, free. Sound like a deal. I was wary. Tests, I had come to learn, were dangerous and often result in death. Testing Baroque Works applicants, testing the crew when I joined them, testing. Measuring abilities, gaining knowledge. I love mind games, however, and Venus didn't seem like the type of goddess to give lethal quizzes. She was playing mind games with me now, a trick she'd probably picked up from Athena back in her Greek days. I was good at those mind games, finding the puzzle and solving the mystery, keeping that poker face intact. But it was the only way. I had to accept, lethal or no. A part of me, deep down, thought it would be fun. Another part of me whispered do it for your nakama. But my chest told me do it for Zoro. I would never see him again if I didn't, and what would happen to the Straw Hat Pirates afterward? Would we continue to sail through to the New World, or would we just stop here and never even see the second half of the Grand Line? What would become of us? I would never find any other nakama as loving as them for the rest of my life. I would find no safe haven from the government, staying in hiding until the end of my days, alone. I didn't want to be alone ever again. I didn't want to wake up and not smell Sanji's excellent cooking. I didn't want to sit in a chair and not have to tune out Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper's happy yells. I didn't want to neglect conversations with Nami about girly things the other boys detested. But I especially did not want to not see the swordsman out every day training until his skin glistened with sweat. I would miss spending silent time together in the crow's nest, training and reading. The nice one-word conversations as we passed each other. I didn't want that to go away. Not ever. I accept your challenge, I stated firmly. A wry smile curled Venus's lips. Excellent.